Welcome to the Siddha Podcast. Today's guest is Marty Wuttke. Marty Wuttke is a world-renowned neurofeedback practitioner and clinician. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of the Wuttke Infinite Potential Institute here in Santa Barbara, California. He is also the author of the Brain Sutras and the president of the Center of Spiritual Awareness in Lakemont, Georgia. Today's episode we talk about Roy Eugene Davis. Roy Eugene Davis for a long time was the head of the Center of Spiritual Awareness in Lakemont, Georgia. He was a good friend, a teacher, an author, and also a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. He was born in 1931 in Ohio, and with 18 read the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Shortly after that, he hitchhiked through the US to arrive at the headquarters of the SRF, for the Self-Realization Fellowship in Los Angeles, California, at Christmas time, actually, Christmas Eve, and knocked at the doors there to join Paramahansa Yogananda and become his student in 1949 when he was only 18. His whole life was dedicated to Kriya Yoga, to teaching, studying, writing books until 2019 when he made his transition. We both had the fortune to meet Roy Eugene Davis in person and spend time with him and hear his lectures. Marty especially had a very long time with his teacher Roy Eugene Davis. Marty, first of all, thank you again for being again our guest here. And would you like to share with us how you met Roy Eugene Davis?
Sure. I grew up in New York, outside of New York City, and I moved from New York to Georgia to attend Chiropractic University, and that was in the early 1980s. And I had a classmate who recognized my obsession with spiritual matters, particularly with studying different spiritual teachings and philosophies. And he happened to have lived at a Center for Spiritual Awareness for a time before he attended Chiropractic University. He was from that area of North Georgia, and he said to me one day, I think you should come meet this guy, Roy Eugene Davis. He's doing a lecture for a center here in Atlanta. And I'll never forget it. I went to the lecture. It was in the upper floor of a bank, which was a room they rented for this service. And I had been, as I said, I had been studying a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different teachings. So I was really on a search, as many people are when they start out on a spiritual path. And as soon as I saw Roy up in the front of the room speaking, I recognized him. I knew that he was an authentic spiritual teacher, that he knew what he was talking about. He was an embodiment of the message that he was giving, and I had a intuition that this is my teacher. This is somebody I want to learn from. And then I found out that his center was just a couple hours north of Atlanta, where I was living at the time. So my friend introduced me to Roy after the lecture, and Roy patted me on the shoulder 3 times, and he said, "Come up and see me." And I took that very seriously. So what I did every Sunday that I could make it, I traveled up to that part of North Georgia, and they had Sunday morning meditations there at the center. And so every Sunday, every time I could do it, I would go up there just to sit and meditate with him. And there was a few local people there as well, and they had occasional weekend workshops, which I made sure I attended. So I did that for a little over a year. Made that trek up to North Georgia, a beautiful drive, a beautiful area of North Georgia. And didn't have a lot of conversations with Roy, just mostly sitting, listening, meditating, and then, of course, reading his books, listening to the various audio recordings he had made. And then, before too long, I left chiropractic school. I was so obsessed with this spiritual path that Roy offered to me. He said, "Do you want to work and live here?" And I didn't hesitate. I said, "Yes, absolutely." So I moved up there. I think it was October of 1981, and I had various jobs on the property. It was a big property, 12 acres, and had the great blessing and good fortune to have a lot of contact with him and observe how he interacted with other people, observe how he worked, his dedication, and his very clear spiritual teaching and profound presence, I have to say. So that began. I lived there for a couple of years, and then I took a job at a local hospital, a psychiatric hospital there, teaching meditation at first, and then eventually that evolved into what we do now, neurofeedback therapy.
Great. How was it living there at the ashram, like on a daily basis? I mean, a lot of people may dream of something like that, living with your guru, living with your teacher.
Yeah, it was like a dream. At that time, myself and I think one other person were actually living on the grounds there in guest houses. And, you have access to these beautiful grounds, plus the meditation hall, the library, and then almost daily, daily meetings with Roy, which, really was highly inspirational. And I kept to a very strict meditation schedule. I was sort of emulating what Roy did when he was at Paramahansa Yogananda's ashram. Roy said that he used to meditate 8 hours a day, not all at once, but a few hours in the morning, afternoon, and then evening. So that was my goal, to meditate as many hours. So it was sort of a monk existence, meditating, studying literature, working, of course, and then sleeping in between. So it was a perfect environment for me to follow my spiritual path, and many experiences, many profound spiritual experiences happened very early on, which further inspired me and kept me motivated to really stay firm on the path.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit of these early years of Roy Eugene Davis, when he was kind of working at this goat farm they had, and also kind of secluded in a way, and really having a lot of time for spiritual practices. When you think of Roy as your teacher, how would you say, did he change your life, or what really stands out for you? Like,
Yeah, well, he was a role model. I mean, as I said earlier, he embodied the teachings. And just by observing him, again, how he interacted with people, his own very disciplined schedule. I mean, Roy would, the where I lived on the grounds, I could see the road that led into the property, and Roy would see the lights from his car come in 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock. I remember there was a period where it was like 12:30 at night. He would so disciplined. He would come in. He would, I'd see the light shining in my room, and then he would go up to his office, which was in one of the guest houses called the Chalet. It wasn't a guest house at that point; it was his office, and so he lived what he was teaching, and that had a profound influence on me, because I needed a role model, somebody who was highly spiritually advanced and super self-disciplined, and I tried to emulate that. And when he was coming in at 3:30 in the morning, that became a natural cycle for me. I started to get up and start meditating at 3:30, meditate for a few hours, and then the work day would start between 7 and 8 usually.
Right. That's something you kept until until now.
Yeah, I still pop up at 3:30. That's it.
When I hear other people talking about their relationship with Roy and their experience, sometimes I have the feeling like that spiritual teachers like Roy Eugene Davis kind of play a specific role for each of their students. Like for some, the best friend; for the other, more the father role, and so on and so on. Can you say something like what is your...
I observed that too. He would often, accommodate whoever it was he was talking to or meeting with. His relationships were different with different people, but for the most part, he was always the same. But my biological father passed away when I was 18, and so I met Roy, roughly 5 years after that. He knew that my father had passed, and I really needed, and he did play that. He played a father role with me as well as a spiritual mentor, guide, guru, and that was very nice. And in fact, my mother, when she knew that I was living there, she wanted to see what this was all about. My mother was a very devout Roman Catholic from New York, and very involved with the church up there, and she wasn't so sure about, what I was doing in this remote area of North Georgia, living at an ashram. So I told Roy, and he said, "Tell her to come, tell her to visit." So she came and spent, just 3 or 4 days, and he was so gracious and nice to her. It was really a beautiful thing for me, and I'll never forget. She was there long enough to attend the Sunday morning meditation, and my mother was not a meditator. She was deeply religious, but that wasn't a part of the Roman Catholic Church, although it is now. But I'll never forget, after the meditation, she said to me, she said, "I saw a beautiful blue light, and I realized that all spiritual traditions lead to the same thing. It's the same thing." And I was stunned, and I told Roy about it, and he just smiled.
It's awesome. Something which I believe, I hope I'm not incorrect, Ellen Grace O'Brien said, is that she learned the most just being with Roy, and not necessarily in verbal communication, but in non-verbal communication, if you so will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many teachers, advanced teachers, who have this presence it's like their consciousness is palpable. And there were many Sundays when I went up there to meditate there and be in his presence, where there was only 2 or 3 people attending the meditations. And I often said, and I still do, that I got more out of those silent communications than I did out of all the reading and studying that I did. And oftentimes, the only interaction we'd have was, "Hi, how are you? See you next week," and that was about it. But there is definitely something about being in the presence of, a truly God-realized master, and then it's like osmosis. It's you're bathed in that consciousness, and that to this day, the Center for Spiritual Awareness, that energy is palpable there. People come there and recognize it almost immediately, and then if you spend a few days there, your own spiritual awareness, intuition, and so on is greatly enhanced. And I think that's there are sacred places around the world where similar things happen, but I just happen to be tuned into that particular energy.
Right. And I think this is also the tuning in with that vibration or with that consciousness is basically also what wakes us up.
Yes.
And the more we are open for that, when we are there or when we interact with someone, the more it can potentially change us.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think this is also a difference why some people pick up on it or not, because it depends of, are you open for that and sensitive for that, or if you some people just saw ordinary person in Roy when they met him, but I think it depends of, is that the right teaching for you? Are you open for that? Or are you, if you're convinced about something and you're not open for something new, then you're not able to perceive it in a way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Whenever Roy talked about his teacher, Paramahansa Yogananda, he was not a person who always or very often was very emotional, but ever so often he spoke of Paramahansa Yogananda. You could sense and feel and see how close his relationship with Paramahansa Yogananda was and how dear he was to him. Do you remember a particular story which pops into your mind, which he told about his relationship with his teacher?
Yeah, there were many, many stories that he would share during the retreat programs that, I think some of the most endearing stories were when Roy was living and running the goat farm in Arizona. He would go visit Yogananda in Palm Springs. Yogananda had another little, isolated retreat house there, and he told Roy, visit me often. And I think some of those stories where he and Yogananda would go for walks around the property, and Roy, they were just informal, but occasionally Roy would ask a profound question, not being entirely sure if it was appropriate to ask it, but Yogananda never hesitated. If Roy, asked him, or, do you know how many of the saints in Autobiography of a Yogi are fully God-realized and liberated? Yogananda said, not many. I mean, he was very straightforward. And I think there was one story where Roy says, just spontaneously, have I been with you before? Meaning past lives. And Yogananda said, you wouldn't be with me now if you weren't, and you will be with me again. You are a participant in this work, not my work, but this work, meaning the spreading of Kriya Yoga teachings. So some of those were just, and Yogananda was, he liked to joke around, he liked to tease the monks. One story most people have heard is when Yogananda, they were sitting in the kitchen eating with the monks, and Yogananda spotted a bottle of Tabasco sauce, and he wanted to teach them how to overcome, their senses. So he got a spoon, got the Tabasco, and he said, "Okay, line up, boys," and he gave everybody a dose of Tabasco sauce, laughing, of course, the whole time. So.
Yeah, I remember that story too. That's kind of fun. Yeah. Is there like anything else you want to share when it comes to Roy Eugene Davis or teachers in general?
Again, Roy was a role model. One thing, if you met him and if you were around him for a while, you would see that he was very, very on schedule. I think some days he had like a 15-minute segments all day long where, this 15 minutes, this half hour, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. And he really was strict about keeping to his schedule. And we, of course, we would all honor that and try to go along with what his agenda was. But up until his transition, until he left his body in 2019, he was always on a schedule, a writing schedule, meditation schedule, and of course time for leisure. I remember not many occasions, but a few occasions he'd play golf, and he would enjoy his children. He was not just all work. He took time to, engage in other activities. Not much, but on occasion he did.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all this. I also want to encourage you to look up videos on YouTube. There are several of Roy's talks. Also, one where he speaks about higher states of consciousness, for example, is one of my favorites. There is another where he talks about his experience with Paramahansa Yogananda. And I also want to invite you to read his books. Those are really very special and dear to me. This is how I was first introduced to Roy before I actually met him in person. And I read I got the sense of his highly advanced state just by reading his books, because you see what he knows when you read his books as well. With that, thank you for listening again, and we hope to see you virtually soon. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.